Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. With the Wheel of Jobs fully replenished, we start over on the Wednesday evening the day after 7.2 released, as Paladin. And this set had a strange emphasis on quote-unquote high-level dungeons. Speaking of which, for Duty 1, we went to ARF, Aetherochemical Research Facility. And turns out Anani knew me. Hello! They actually mentioned being rather nervous about messing up now that I was there. On the topic of that, as long as you try your best, I think the worst I could pull out of my pocket would be observing a random mistake you made. And surely that's okay. By the end of the day, you probably already improved past that point by the time I say it in a video or something. And also, while we are on the subject, Anani did very well in this run. Now, this was one day after the Black Mage changes applied, so of course, can't expect all Black Mages to be perfect. Besides, even with the changes, the job's still a bit complicated and overwhelming with information. And besides, even the simplest job can be easily misunderstood. Case in point, this Black Mage appeared to play some sort of combination of level 34 Black Mage, level 50 Black Mage, and MP battery Black Mage. Not a big fan of spending all of their MP, preferred to switch state with Transpose, and mainly attacked with Blizzard 1 and Fire 1, and only sometimes spent the Firestarter procs. I was a bit more focused on other things throughout the duty, so I didn't catch on to this until super late, so I briefly mentioned the existence of Blizzard 4 and Fire 4 at the end of the duty. Our healer also had some oddities about their play. Notably, they quite randomly chose between sometimes casting Holy, sometimes even on a single target. They would also sometimes stand and wait for the stun to end before going again. That last bit is a lot more understandable due to the fact that Holy works in mysterious ways, genuinely. For those uncertain what I mean by that, somehow, simply spamming Holy will naturally match up in such a way that, for the most part, you will naturally get 7 seconds of stun in succession. This should still be the case despite the cast time changes to Holy. Emphasis on should, but even if it doesn't, the damage Holy provides is always worth the potential stun loss. So, now that I've addressed the elephants in the room, the majority of the duty went just fine. And then we got to the last boss. On the first pull, both Asuna and Anani immediately dropped to the first dual star. While I decide what to do about it, I continue to try to keep the ship steady, although the decision is wipe it. On the second try, Asuna immediately goes down to the first dual star again. With 3 players alive, I think it is beatable, so we push on. Unfortunately, the damage was too overwhelming when the stack marker came. For the third attempt, we have problems with the chains that causes Asuna and Anani to go down. Tip for anyone confused: when the marker appears over your head, stay close to your team. Only once the chain that binds you to someone appears, start running. The distance you have to separate will be the starting length and then some, so if you run too soon, you may doom yourself. At this point, Anani decides to try and help explain some mechanics with the help of Google Translate, as our mage combo appears to be French. But notably, also clearly willing to communicate. The only thing I add is trying to explain orb explosion order and the chain thing I just explained now. On this fourth attempt, we make it past the intermission, but then Asuna goes down to the dual star after that. But with so little of the fight left, we make it to the end. Good work trying to help as well, Anani. For Duty 2, we went to A2N, Cuff of the Father. You know, the one with the mob brawl. My co-tank was very diligent about using the Gobwalker, so I put extra effort into getting away from the bombs as they were moved away to make the most of it. Everything was going great, and then at some point I ended up getting hit by a bomb, and then I got 3 more Vuln stacks from something I can't quite see. Maybe you can see it, but either way, I was certainly very confused. We of course did manage to make it through safely though. For Duty 3, we went to The Burn. Right at the start, our Dragoon requested to watch the cutscenes, which they were of course told was always allowed. As this was their first time, it probably comes as no surprise they had minor issues with boss mechanics here and there. Selune, the machinist, and I also had some funny emoting memes here and there in the duty as we waited. Now, on the first boss, the general gimmick of the fight is that the crystals both serve as walls when the boss aims something at you, but the crystals also explode when hit. For the second boss, the main standout thing is when the boss leaves the arena, when it comes back with a column of friends to dash across with it. Except one of them is broken. Simply stand in front of that one to be safe. On the last boss, the scariest part is the amount of mechanics that put you in a block of ice, so make sure to keep an eye out in case any of your friends get frozen. The boss also somewhat frequently uses these Starburst AoEs. This is a new nickname for this type of shape I learned recently, and I love it. While things do get a bit scary in the final boss fight, we do make it through. For Duty 4, we went to Praetorium. There isn't that much to say about the duty itself, but a duty with sections of AoE like this is very nice in this level range for Paladin. Just to try and put it into perspective, the buffs to Total Eclipse and Prominence means that Paladin's average AoE potency is 170 per GCD per target. For comparison, among the tanks, the second place for filler AoE at this level is Gunbreaker, whose Demon Slaughter is 160. Meaning their average is only 130. In other words, Paladin's sustained AoE potential is crazy strong in this level range. For Duty 5, we went to Strayborough Deadwalk, Ghost Park. After the first boss, we had a bit of a discussion about the fight. The dancer is not a big fan of it. The scholar and I find it rather amusing, although admittedly, it sucks if you have any latency issues at all, as it can be impossible to dodge well. Now, the reason I at least find it amusing is because your average group just is not going to wipe to this boss very much, even if the fight can really drag out. But is that really so bad? I usually laugh it off when things go sideways here. An interesting tip about the fight, which I know I've mentioned before, is that the problematic charging children can be baited. Like, entirely. Their first dash is always aimed at the player furthest away from them. The second dash is always aimed at the player the closest to them. So, if you position smartly, you can somewhat predict exactly where they run, making them very easy to dodge preemptively. This is of course the easiest with a pre-made, and in particular, if either the healer and a DPS does the baiting, or two ranged players at least do it. Aside from this discussion, we had an interesting situation where the second boss died about where it usually does, before the third set of spinning teacups, while the final boss took longer than usual. My best guess, given it wasn't much of a time difference, is maybe that raid buffs aligned better on the second boss. For Duty 6, we went to Holminster Switch, and as always, the first few pulls are surprisingly tough, although I ended up not needing hallowed ground. On the second boss, we had a bit of a strange situation with the limit cut mechanic, but aside from that, no deaths of course. Moving past that, something interesting about the packs after the second boss is that often I see tanks carry each pack over to the next pack. In my experience, it takes about 1 GCD's worth of time to walk there and for the mobs to properly spawn, so just fighting the mobs where they are is usually fine. In fact, dragging the mobs over to the next pack just means some jobs have to hold their burst and wait so that you stand still for that dot-on or whatever. Finally, while the duty as a whole went a reasonably normal length I feel, we finished off the final boss during the crazy fierce beating phase, which I don't think I've done at least recently. A rather quick run of that fight. For Duty 7, we went to Antitower. On the way to the first boss, it was quite amusing that it felt like some of the party really believed if we kept running we would be able to pull more. Ultimately, this ended up with us finding ourselves ahead of the next pack when it finally spawned. This is something that I've mentioned before, that personally I'm not really against the duty forcing us to fight a specific amount of enemies, but when you put us in an empty hallway, I, as the tank, will feel compelled to run to the end of it, just in case it causes enemies to spawn. This makes it much more awkward when the enemies only spawn after something specific is done, as it ends up placing the next pack behind us. Now, on the first boss, there's a mechanic where 2 players, I think usually the tank and healer, get turned into frogs. This is ended early by killing the ad frogs. Unfortunately, our DPS decided not to do that, so we just hung out as frogs, I guess. This is an interesting kind of quote-unquote teamwork, as on the final boss, at some point, 2 players are turned into dolls and are saved by being attacked. I believe this is usually the 2 DPS, and indeed the healer and I helped there. Another mechanic to take note of on this boss is the brace mechanic. You need to hit the boss from one specific angle, which is usually the front, otherwise she smacks back at you. And finally, she also has a weird gaze mechanic. The gaze marker is placed on a player, but it does not mean look away from that player. It means the boss will fire a gaze mechanic at that player, so get away from them and that player should look away. Weird, huh? For Duty 8, we went to Yuweyawata Field Station. On the first boss, considering how much damage we were doing, I feel like it might have been possible to ignore the crystals entirely, but again, I don't know for sure. If you ignore the crystals, they explode for damage and also apply a magic vulnerability, but I don't know how impactful it is. And I believe the final crystal pops early enough that the debuff ends before the boss does its raid wide. Either way, it looked like it was possible to pump enough to skip the AoE from the boss entirely. On a completely different note, was I the only person that noticed that the icon for Atonement Ready was changed this patch? Before, it was this lightning blue icon, and now it's straight up just the Atonement icon, like it used to be. The first time I noticed it was right after the second boss in this dungeon, so you can probably imagine how rarely I needed to look at it. On the final boss, our monk dies during the first half of the fight, but despite that, I still think we cleared earlier than an average party on both this boss, but also the duty in general. 13 minutes. Very nice. For Duty 9, we went to Castrum Meridianum, and I immediately got this weird impression that our Astrologian was very lazy or outright bored. It doesn't matter that much, it is just Castrum Meridianum, right? But it was pretty funny when they just dropped all their cards on me. To make the run as quick as possible, I didn't even bother to dodge the AoEs on the second boss that would require me to go out of melee range, and I think it worked out. That said, I definitely saw the Astrologian just stand there for a while during the final boss. Despite the laziness, we still cleared reasonably fast. And finally for Duty 10, we went to Fell Court of Troia, and turns out Pennsylvania knew me. Hello! Again, a reminder that this is day 2 of the Black Mage changes being in effect. But that said, despite both Black Mages seeming to run a very basic AoE rotation, we still had impressive AoE damage throughout the duty. Did you know that the first boss technically has a Harden Rage? If you don't make the cast right at the end, it actually wipes you. But if you don't make that check, you're probably either alone or something else is wrong. The final boss, Scammarione, has an interesting mechanic that could easily screw you over down the line if you don't pay attention. Notably, the Rotten Rampage mechanic. The circle AoEs, both the orange ones and the ones placed on players, rot the outer walls of the arena. Meaning that if you ignore this, you could end up with 0 walls left, which means the purple knockback circle, which is a full knockback that you cannot immune, that also kills you if you stand in it, will lead to a full party of somewhat heavy dots, which can easily overwhelm a party. In other words, make sure you don't hit a wall with your spread markers to preserve as many walls as possible. Another little thing I did in this particular party was use Clemency in the ad phase to try and generate enmity on all the ads. It is a rather old school trick that usually doesn't matter, but someone needed healing there anyway. By the way, did you know that Warrior cannot solo Fell Court of Troia synced? The first boss's Harden Rage is actually too tight. A surprisingly relaxed set of duties, although the start of an over 30-minute ARF was quite something. Originally, the reason why I started considering alternative ways to choose jobs for these Mentor Roulette sets was because I was a bit interested in playing specific jobs. This is also part of why I ended up choosing to stick with the roulette, as with no direction, I would probably just spam the same few jobs, and a big benefit of these sets is demonstrating how to play all the jobs one by one in any situation. That said, that doesn't mean I don't hope for a specific job whenever I spin the wheel. So for this one, I was hoping to draw Black Mage, of course, so if you're watching these in sequence perhaps in the future, consider how long it takes before I actually do draw Black Mage from the wheel. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact: originally when Paladin's rework arrived in 6.3, Holy Spirit was considered as an option to stall the filler rotations to make sure you got the optimal burst lineup every time, as it seemed to be an alright average potency option to do so, hardcasting Holy Spirit. However, the deal breaker for this trick was that casting Holy Spirit meant your auto attacks were delayed by 1 second. And auto attacks are worth 30 potency per second for non-caster jobs. Subtracting 30 potency from Holy Spirit made it suddenly no longer worthwhile and effectively led to the kind of priority rotation that since evolved into what we do today.